Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Avoid Crisis podcast. This is episode 13. It's a big day because today we have Paul Kapusta from Stadium Tech Report, who's our special guest today. And I'd like to introduce you to Ray, who's another host here, Paul. And just as a background, Paul has been a journalist and writing for all kinds of different technical communication type pieces in a number of really big magazines until finally starting his own business and website. And he's been dealing with a lot of key sports people. And want to thank you, Paul, for helping to get the 49ers that Super Bowl stadium pick. Thank you very much for the influence. And really appreciate that. I know that you also have done some things here with the Giants recently, but wanted to have you on the show, and we want to talk about just maybe some history on what's happened just with wireless connectivity. People have a lot of different expectations of what it should be
Yes.
like when they get to the stadium. Why don't you just take us a little bit through you know how things have shifted and changed, and also point out too, from the standpoint of an avoid crisis, we're thinking about you need to think, and then what you have to do is you have to make some decisions, decide, and then you have to act. So you don't want to end up going all the way from tailgating up to get through the gates there and realize that you don't have your tickets, or you didn't bring your phone that has the
Right.
mobile tickets or whatever. So let's talk about some of those issues.
Sure. Thanks, first of all, for having me on the show. Appreciate it. Nice to meet you, Ray. Alan, good to reconnect. We knew each other way back in the past as wannabe sports writers. Actually, we were good sports writers at the time.
Sure.
We didn't know the newspaper business was dying, so we could go.
Everything went digital, right?
Everything went digital, and
Yeah.
those dead trees just stayed growing as trees, I guess. I can definitely give you a quick recap on the whole, the just the whole wired at stadiums, and I think still to this day, many people go to a stadium expecting there to be no connectivity because for years and years, and for those of us who have been around for some years and years, that was the thing, right? You went there, your phone didn't work, you couldn't talk to anybody. Wasn't a big problem because you were mostly just watching the game. But I will, we just had our sort of like our 10th anniversary here at Stadium Tech Report. And over the last 10 years, pretty much any venue of what I would call sort of a size, like a pro NFL venue, pretty much every hockey, NBA arena, and certainly all the Major League Baseball stadiums, all now have really good levels of connectivity. It does vary from place to place. Some are exceptional, others are just sort of catching up. But you really can, as a fan, should expect that you have some kind of decent connectivity at an event, and that's either via Wi-Fi provided by the stadium or just via cellular, because most, if not all, stadiums of size have both there. So, right now, is to sort of address it off the top, forget about what happened in the past. Go use your phone, try to connect. There's usually signs, instructions helping you get Wi-Fi. Most places don't. When a lot of this started, a lot of places asked for emails. They wanted to harvest the data. Most of them just don't do that anymore. Now it's an amenity like running water, like bathrooms, like electricity. You go there, you connect to the Wi-Fi, you connect to the cellular, and you can do all the things you wanted for social media and that. And I think as we'll get to here in this discussion, it's also something that's sort of a must-have for crisis communication situations.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you can talk a little bit about just the whole point of access, and maybe some of the journeys that these stadiums and their management has taken to try to address security concerns. And then at the same time, I mean, you're also talking about this 10-year period of growth and acceleration of capabilities in both wireless and other communications around the area that also was impacted by COVID, which had security restrictions as well, right? And so there was a lot of
Right.
changes there that had to be addressed as well.
Yeah, and I think historically, when a lot of this first started coming out, people putting Wi-Fi in stadiums, more cellular, you had some real visible pushback. Mark Cuban, the owner of the Mavericks down in Dallas, was one of one who's very outspoken, saying, "I don't want people looking at their phones during the game. I want them watching the game, cheering." But as we've come to figure out, people don't actually watch their phones that much at the game. The whole reason for having connectivity is, one, for social media. People like to stay in touch. People like to, especially the big game. I'm here at the Super Bowl and you're not. That's a very key, necessary item. But really, it's just to sort of foster and enable just the current day mode of getting to and getting around the stadium. I mean, 10 years ago, Uber wasn't a thing, right? But now
Sure.
you come into a game or come out of a game, and there's everybody's trying to get a ride. They're trying to get a Uber or a Lyft.
Right.
Digital. You mentioned COVID, and COVID was, as unfortunate as everything was, and with the shutdown, once the stadiums reopened and we're letting people back in, COVID was like the response to the pandemic concerns were like jet fuel to digital technology adoption. Stadiums, which had been sort of trying to put in digital ticketing for all the reasons that it helps them, all of a sudden went 100% digital ticketing. This did create some initial problems, right? Because I think, as you said, people would get to the gate and go, "I didn't download my ticket." And if there was one place where a lot of stadiums didn't have good connectivity for a while, it was right outside the gates. So you have a combination of everybody trying to download their ticket in a small space, low connectivity, big lines, and after COVID, the lines were like anathema. People just did not want to be in lines, and some places there was some unruly behavior at one stadium. Wi-Fi went out. People trying to download tickets couldn't do it. The game was starting. It was a big game, big college, top 10 matchup, and the fans just pushed past the gates. There's more of us than there are of you, and they just went through the gates. And so to your point, planning ahead, I think both the venue saw what happened, and now you're seeing this. Pretty much every stadium has responded. They've added lots of connectivity right outside the gates. They have done some things like, I know SoFi Stadium out in Los Angeles. They've actually perimeter areas saying, "Download your ticket here," where they have focused Wi-Fi connectivity that's farther out from the gates. So people are starting to get in their heads, "Oh yeah, I got to download my ticket," and they do it right before they're standing in front of the doors. And then there's an education on the fan side as well too, right? It's like know how you're going to do it, know how you're going to connect. Am I going to connect on Wi-Fi? There's frankly still a lot of people who don't even know their phones have Wi-Fi. There's a little bit of user error going on, but I think you're seeing some rapid corrections, and I would say even things that were a problem a year and a half ago, and we're just not seeing any of that now.
Right. Hey, Paul, this is Ray. And again, thank you for joining us here on Avoid Crisis podcast. Love the material on your site. Just for our listeners, I want to repeat, it's stadiumtechreport.com. Just how it sounds. Really great information there.
Thanks.
And I want to take us through the process. We're talking about entry. And I've noticed this myself. Clear is there's a lot of alternative third-party tools now that are being used for security and access and to speed things up. Clear being one of them. How have you seen this trend going, and where do you see that going as well to get masses of people into a singular point in a short period of time efficiently, but also safely? Where do you see it going?
It's interesting. It's really picked up on several fronts, and you mentioned Clear. Clear is one of the technologies, because stadiums looked at this and said, how do we get rid of the lines? Where are the choke points? And, clearly one of them was security. For years and years, ever since since the Boston bombings was when you saw security being, airport type security being added to stadiums. So it's been maybe about 8 or 9 years now that this has been happening. But what was the only thing they had to buy? They bought these regular metal detectors. So what did that mean? You walk through, there's a beep. You had to stop. You had to take your keys out. You had to put your things in a bucket. That went on the side. You had a purse or something that had to go on the other side. What you're seeing now is technology sort of stepping up to the plate. And on the security side, a couple of companies have really done a really interesting job. One is called Evolv Technologies, and they're sort of the leader in this space. The other one is called Extract One, but they have gates up where you just walk right through. You don't stop, nothing out of your pockets, nothing out of your bag. These things they look like big flat panels, and if you've been to SoFi Stadium, they're in a lot of stadiums now. About 20 stadiums have implemented the Evolv stuff over the last year, and you don't really notice them if you're not looking, because they're pretty wide. The lanes are pretty wide. Multiple people can come through at the same time. So Evolv's sort of corporate motto is, security at the pace of life. You're just walking. But they are secure. They use a different technology. They don't describe it fully because they don't want to give away all their secrets, blah, blah, blah. But you're starting to see some of these things in airports too.
Now, is there just thinking of that as like you're walking through this area, and if somebody has something that is, let's say, a foreign object that needs to be investigated, is there somebody that's monitoring a device somewhere and says, okay, stop this person, and there's somebody there, excuse me, sir, excuse me, ma'am, would you how does this work?
Yeah, this is part of the issue. It is a different process. So there's somebody with the Evolv system and also with the Extract One system. Instead of having the agent right next to the gate, where the beeping is, they're sitting usually about 10 feet away, as the person's walking towards them. They have a monitor. And I've been in the back and watched this, and the monitor will not just show that there's a problem, it'll show where it is on the person. So if they have something in their pocket, if there's something down in the leg, there'll be a little indicator there. And then the staffer says, and there's usually like a second shoot, and they say, sorry, we need to give you some more, scanning. So it's
okay.
And I've written about this too. It's like these things are really great, but you need both more training on the stadium side because it's an entirely different way of doing things, and it's a little bit more. People are like, oh, I'm through, I'm fine, and you have to sort of grab them and say, no, you're not. But then it's also education of the fan, right?
Sure.
You need to there's people who start walking through these things. I was at a Broncos game last year, watching them, and the Broncos have a similar walkthrough from a company called Chea. It's an Italian company that made all the old metal detectors, and people would stop in the middle, put their hands up, but they're holding their phones in their hands because they don't understand, right? There was education. And my thing has always been in the stadium, you got to educate the fans. Send your season ticket holders an email, tell them, explain this stuff, how it works, because it's the first time you go through it, it just, you're like, what's going on? Am I secure? Aren't I supposed to go through some kind of metal detector? So it takes a little bit, but usually it's one of those things where once you do it once or twice, you figure it out. Or if you're behind and you watch people in front of you, I guess you just walk through. But yeah, there's a learning curve, and it's definitely hard, but it's so worth it. I think the stats are something like with a regular metal detector, you can get through maybe 60 to 90 people, in an hour. And with these new ones, you can get up to 3,000, 4,000 people just walking through.
So really reducing the throughput there.
Increase the throughput. You reduce the time, but here's the problem. So now you have all these people flying through security. What are you doing with ticketing? Because now you got digital ticketing. Do I scan it? Do I hold my NFC? Now you have more people coming to the ticketing thing at one time than you did before. So
there's even though a lot of it's digital, there seems to be a lot of manual kind of oversight that happens as you're going through the ticketing gates as well. Somebody's kind of, you're not holding your phone right, twist it around this way, move it over towards this way, and you can go ahead and you're like, okay, when's it going to beep and turn green, and when is that turnstile going to open so I can go through? Now you have people that are behind you, they're anxious to get into the game. You talked about bad behaviors, and I think that the bad behaviors and time expectations. You've been
Yeah.
out in the tailgate area, now you're coming in. You want to hurry to get in. You don't want to miss any of that pregame. The
Yes.
announcements, whatever you're trying to get through, and you don't want to waste a lot of time just trying to pass through. But isn't that really, as you mentioned, the choke point? Isn't that still a choke point?
It is, and it can be, but so there's two ways that stadiums are sort of countering with this. One is that they're starting to put security perimeters much farther out. Like the Broncos went from being right next to the stadium gates, and then they went and put the security perimeter. The stadium sits on kind of the top of this little hill, and they put the security perimeter way out at the hill, creating this big sort of open plaza area in the middle. SoFi Stadium has done the same thing. I don't know if you've been out there yet, but it sits on this huge sort of plaza campus, and they're building up all kinds of retail and residential stuff around it. So they have a lot of space, and they've moved the security way out. So you scan security instead of going right into a line. You can kind of wander around. There's like concession stands. There's so there's not a great crush right away. But then the second thing is technology is also addressing this. And I think again it's one of those things, there's no single way yet to get into a stadium. You go to one stadium, it's got one kind of scanner. You go to another stadium, you're scanning a QR code. You can do NFC, which is near field communications, where you just hold up your phone and it does a radio signal. And I think Ray, I don't know, it was you who mentioned, there's also some stadiums are now using facial authentication technology, where like Clear, you sign up, take a picture of your face, and then you attach that to your ticketing thing, and then when you walk up, it's actually like usually just like an iPad or something, and you look at it, and the iPad says you're good to go, and you just walk by. Cleveland Browns have been doing this. The New York Mets have been doing it. Columbus Crew, who's a soccer team, they last year, 2 years ago, they had both the Evolve security gates and the facial authentication from, there's a software company called Wicket that's one of the leaders in this space right now. And it was amazing because I went to a game and I'm sitting inside behind all these gates, but I want to see how this works. And there had been a big rainstorm, so there was a huge crowd of people waiting to get in the main gate. But they had the facial authentication, they had the Evolve, and they had pretty good buy-in from people who were just doing scanners. It was a hold it up, it was a pedestal, not somebody with a hand scanner. Mm-hmm. And they had about 20 gates. And I swear to God, that whole crowd was inside the stadium in 10 minutes. It was just, It was something amazing. So it's a combination. It has to be a combination of process and technology. And I would say a third thing is education, mainly for the fans.
Yeah.
I mean, you can educate your staff, but you got to let the fans know.
Paul, you're an expert in this whole field. And so I do have a question for you, which is, does weather somehow impact the whole connectivity and wireless at the stadium? I mean, as an example, in Green Bay, would you end up getting frozen out? Not just because Aaron Rodgers has left, but really,
or your beer freezes. No, generally, weather doesn't really affect it too much. Snow can sometimes slow down Wi-Fi, but really the only thing that would keep you from using your phone is the fact that your fingers would freeze when you take it out. But yeah, weather is not usually a problem. Bright sunlight is a problem with the scanner. So I don't know. I have a great story when the Niners opened Levi's Stadium. They had this whole new system with an app and scanners, and there was a company called VenueNext, and they had these optical scanners, which were just really cool design, like white holes with the little thing we would scan your ticket. Well, the main gate to get in to the Niners Stadium is on the west side where the sun was shining, and the first people started coming in. It was you put your phone out and the sun reflects, so it wasn't scanning the tickets.
Oh, wow.
And how they this was like for their first game, and how did they fix it? This is a great story. Somebody went to the gift shop and bought like 40 visors, 49ers visors, put the visors on poles to shield the thing from sunlight. It was the
Wow.
funniest thing I ever. It was like, wow, that's low tech, high tech. But yeah, no, weather usually does not affect it.
You know what happens with the? Sorry, Ray. I got another question here. What happens with the Super Bowl as an example? I mean, that's such a big venue. I mean, we know that next year it's going to be in Las Vegas, which is a new stadium, and it'll
Yes.
be the first time there. I mean, I think, our hope and prediction is that it's going to be Brock Purdy from the 49ers going up against Jimmy Garoppolo at the Raiders, because it's going to just draw in everyone.
No,
Now, all of a
Tom
sudden, you have
Brady.
all
He'll
these
come out of
49er
retirement.
fans who are going to be like getting their tickets 6 months in advance somehow, because they're all tech savvy, they know how to go about it.
Yep.
Right? They're going to get in there and they're going to want to be basically doing exactly what you said. Hey, I'm at the Super Bowl, where are you? What's it going to be like for the first time stadium to experience a Super Bowl?
It should be no problem at all, and I only say that because I can look back at the last couple Super Bowls, and I think the one I really want to compare it to is SoFi, right? Because basically SoFi Stadium and Allegiant Stadium were built about the same time. SoFi is a little bit bigger in space. Allegiant is a little bit smaller, cozier inside. But at the Super Bowl at SoFi Stadium, 82% of the fans were able to connect on Wi-Fi. And simultaneously, they had something like 60,000 people all using the network at once. I mean, the people who have built these networks, there's a company called Anthink, which built both of the networks in that stadium. Coincidentally, they're one of our sponsors, for full disclosure. But they've been doing this a long time. They've been at almost all the last Super Bowls for as far back as we can remember, 10, 12 years. And there's a certain black art to designing these networks. There's also, these places were built with these big events in mind. So SoFi Stadium is something like 2,400 Wi-Fi antennas inside the stadium, all set up. Allegiant Stadium, which had great networks from the start, and they use a antenna for cellular stuff called Matsing lens antennas, which are they're about 3 foot to 6 foot ball-shaped antennas, and they stuck those up in the infrastructure. It was funny, they painted them black and called them mini Death Stars, because the Raiders have this whole Death Star thing. So they even have Death Star communications. But these things are really cool. They're I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but they allow the antennas to shoot straight down onto the people. And they're basically the great thing about getting a Super Bowl is that the wireless carriers, namely Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile, if they know you're having a Super Bowl, they don't want their customers to be unconnected. So they will come in the year before and dump, even if the network's great, they will come in and redo it and basically double it just to make sure their customers stay connected. So right now, they're adding almost double the cellular capacity to Allegiant Stadium. I'm sure they're beefing up the Wi-Fi as well. My guess is there will be no problem at all with connectivity. The Cisco gear they put in there is Wi-Fi 6. We're starting to see across stadiums right now the real capabilities of Wi-Fi 6 bearing fruit, because now the handsets finally all have Wi-Fi 6. And I don't know if you know that much about the technology. Wi-Fi 6 was a big jump ahead from Wi-Fi 5. And when you have a Wi-Fi 6 handset and Wi-Fi 6 antennas, you start seeing big leaps in capacity. Ohio State, which is the biggest, Ohio Stadium is pretty much the biggest stadium in operation. They have a Wi-Fi 6 network they put in 3 years ago, and I talked to Jim Null, who's the IT director there, and he said this year, they did a game that was Super Bowl. It's still actually the most Wi-Fi in one day was at Ohio State. It was over 35 terabytes. And he said, we're not seeing any, we could handle more. He's like, we could do more. They're not hitting the limit. So to answer your question in a long-winded way, there shouldn't be any problem at all. For the Super Bowl, these things are tested. These things have been done before. And I just think Allegiant will be great because they've really paid attention to the networks there.
Wow, that's an amazing volume of data, 35 terabytes in it for one event. 60,000 people. That's pretty amazing. That's really cool. We talked about entry and getting rid of the choke points and the lines. And somewhere in there, you mentioned about a beer, and you got me thinking about concessions. So the
Oh,
next line I always run into at the venues is I'm trying to get a beer, and it's a long line. What's technology? What are we doing with technology to get the beer line to go faster?
well, funny you should mention that because it's one of the things we've been covering just a ton of lately. Because after who knows, 50 years of doing concessions the same way, somebody passing a beer down the aisle, and you pass your cash back, or you stand in a big line, behind the guy who's buying hot dogs and popcorn, and oh, maybe what did you want, honey? There's a whole bunch of new technology, and one of the most exciting is the technology called checkout free concession stands. And Allegiant Stadium is just putting in, this is sort of unreported news, but they have 4 of these new stands from a company called Zipin, which is one of the providers of the technology. Amazon also has a version of their Just Walk Out stores. And basically it works like this. You walk up to these stands, and there's a little gate, like a turnstile. And you either scan a credit card, or you can sign up ahead of time with an app. And you flash that at the gate. The gate says green. You go inside. There's usually coolers stocked with cans, maybe some snacks. Some of these stores are a little bit more elaborate, and they have like a hot food thing. And you go, you take what you want, and you can put stuff, like pick something up. I don't want to put it back on the shelf. Take what you want and leave, and you're billed afterwards. The only interaction you have with someone is to look at an ID. And even some of those places are using things like Clear. Like the Raiders have a thing with Clear, where you can order a beer in your seat and take a selfie of yourself, and it connects with your driver's license. So the checkout free store, they're amazing. Like you can get in and out of those things in seconds. They've got them here in Denver, and I won't say the number, but because I don't know if I'm like clear to say that yet. But Allegiant Stadium is more than doubling the stores they have now, so they're going to have even more of those stores. It seems like we're doing a new announcement every week. T-Mobile Park, which is hosting the All-Star game this year, they had 1 store from Amazon last year. They put in 3 more this year. I mean, fans just love them. To your point, we've all spent way too much time in concession lines. When you see these things, people are actually taking selfies of themselves afterwards, going, "I got this beer in 11 seconds. I can't believe it."
That's great.
So it's cool. And then there's also some other stands that have. There's a company called Mashin that has these optical scanner checkout things. So in sort of a similar fashion, you go through a line, you grab your stuff, you put it on top of the tray of the scanner. It sees everything you have and gives you your total, and you scan your card. So you don't have to swipe things like you do at the grocery store, and it beeps and all. It just sees it, and you go. So again, the venues knew they had a problem, and these things are not just addressing the problem; they're also increasing revenues.
That's right.
Like Barclays put one of these Just Walk, checkout free stands under a stairway where there was nothing else before. And according to Zipin, the company who's behind it, they were doing $10,000 worth of revenue in a basketball game. So now you just have to worry about people drinking more beer.
Ray, I know you had recently been in an outdoor concert festival. I know you had some questions about concerts themselves, and maybe you can ask Paul about some of those items.
Yeah. So some of the issues there was the ability to rendezvous with people, right? So you either text or call and say, "Hey, I'm over here, and where are you, and where are we going to meet up," and so on. And just had a tough time. It got to the point where we went old school, and we had set a default that said, "Look,
Right.
if we're not able to use our phones, by 3 p.m., let's meet at this, section sign pole or whatever." And so we had kind of these old school default fail safes that we had to arrange ahead of time, because we just couldn't rely on it was a multi-day event. So is it getting now to the point where we're not going to have that anymore? We will be able to use our phones at all these kinds of venues?
Yes, is the answer. If is the qualifier. If the venue uses the technology that's the thing, because especially with an outdoor concert event like a Coachella or Bottle Rock or
Right.
Outside Lands, your problem is either you don't own the venue if it's like a big park, or if it's Coachella, you're only there once a year, right? In
Right.
one weekend. And to install, say, a Wi-Fi network around all the seating and make it work and put up the poles, it's really cost prohibitive, right? To only run it once a year. But those Matsing lens antennas I was talking about, they were actually developed and first used at Coachella for exactly this problem, because you can sort of aim them. You actually don't even tune them; you just aim them with a laser. So now, if you've gone to Coachella, you'll look behind the stage and you'll see multiple numbers of these big ball antennas, and they can point them out into the crowd and say, we're going to cover this slice of seating area, we're going to cover that's the seating area. And so it can be done cost effectively, because these things can sort of be moved around on trucks, and that's what the cellular companies do. And they'll put it outside where the Super Bowl, where they generally have the big fan fest areas
Right.
around the stadiums to increase connectivity. So yes, it can be done. Will it be done? I think if you're Coachella, that's probably pretty well covered. Ball Rock, I know, is pretty well covered because Cisco is a sponsor there. It might be a little tougher or harder lift in a place like Outside Lands, where you're on city park property and you don't own you don't own the places to put cables or wires or anything like that. But the technology exists to solve that problem. It has been solved in several places. It's just a business question for the event if they want to do it or not.
Got it. And one of the thoughts that came to my mind is, like whenever I'm traveling and I'm at an airport, I'm sorry, I just don't trust airport Wi-Fi. Just it's just God, you're so many. I've heard stories. It hadn't
Yeah.
happened to me, but I've heard enough stories where I'm not going to trust airport Wi-Fi. How secure and how trustworthy? I mean, can people do their banking, over this Wi-Fi network and feel safe about that, or do we still need to keep a little bit of guard up as far as being able to get hacked or whatever, pick up a
Yeah,
virus?
I mean, I don't think, but I wouldn't say that I know for sure. Not that I've heard any stories like that. The stadium networks are fairly fairly safe, but Wi-Fi networks are Wi-Fi networks, right? I mean, if you wanted to, you could campsite. The problem I would have is, maybe like out in the real world, or in a place like an airport or something like that, you could sort of be behind the walls and not be detected. I don't see that happening in a stadium, where once people are in and out, they lock the doors and you're not bringing your laptop in or whatever. I mean, maybe it could be hacked through a phone. I would say, doing your banking, sure, you could do your banking. I think the stadium networks are pretty secure. And if you're really sort of worried about it, use your, don't get on the Wi-Fi, but use your Verizon or your AT&T or T-Mobile or whatever carrier you use, because those are inherently more secure. And when they put these networks into stadiums, they're basically, the carrier gear is still all there. They kind of break it up into these smaller antennas so they can densify, they call it the signal.
Right.
But you're still connected, to the cellular network in the way you always were. And, those networks are pretty bulletproof these days.
Paul, I saw on the Stadium Tech Report where you've actually shown some of the download speeds and the upload speeds. And what was interesting to me on that was that you get what you pay for, right? In other words, if you're sitting in the best seats, you're getting the best connectivity. A lot of people don't know that, right?
Maybe. I'll explain it, but yeah. I mean, if you're in a suite or club area, you're pretty well covered. If you're up in the nosebleeds, maybe not sometimes. But actually, the hardest, some of the hardest seats to cover wirelessly have been the ones right down next to the floor, especially in an arena, basketball arena or hockey, or in football stadiums, because generally you can't put antennas there. There's nothing hanging over you. So it's been, and then if you have a concert on the floor, those have been historically, that's been a hard place to cover as well, because you can't put under, say, where the basketball floor or ice rink is, or football field. However, in the last year, we've seen some new developments. The Matsings are one version of this, but Cisco has also come out with a new Wi-Fi radio that projects its signal farther than the old ones. So you are now seeing much improved coverage for those, courtside seats. I was just looking at something like courtside seats for the finals game in Miami are like 33 grand. I mean, if you're going to pay 33 grand, you're going to want to post that selfie. But you can now cover them from the top down, which was a challenge from before. But, I would say democratically, with a lot of the stadiums have the Wi-Fi done under seat. And even if you're up in the nosebleed sections, and I've done tests up there, if you look under the row in front of you or the row back and you see that little box, you're probably getting a pretty good service because you're pretty close to the antenna right there.
Well, Paul, it's really great that you were able to come onto the show today. We go way back. I mean, back when you were with the Chicago Tribune and I was with the Chicago Sun-Times, and we were writing our stories, and we were up in the press box.
With our Radio Shack.
Who would have thought that one day we'd be on a podcast together talking at this kind of level of technical type things? But I mean, your knowledge and awareness of all this activity going on and connectivity and just how you've really become the expert in this field. It's an amazing journey that you've taken, and I've always appreciated your writing, and I certainly have appreciated hearing you today and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thanks.
How about for you, Ray? What's this been like for you?
Oh, it's been fantastic. It's been an area that I've always wondered, like, why is it not a little more advanced? And it sounds like it's catching up real quick. So thank you, Paul, for sharing this information with us and our listeners. If I could just close out with one final question, let's look to the future. We've talked about a lot of stuff in the past. What's coming next? What should we be thinking about? Particularly as consumers and attendees at these events, what's on the horizon for us?
Well, I think the thing I'd love to see, and probably won't happen soon, but when it does, you can see the technology underpinnings for it is, a single point of entry where you just walk up to a gate or a doorway to a stadium, and because you have your ticket on your phone, because the camera sees your face and knows your identity, it takes care of your ticketing, it takes care of your security, and maybe it says to you, "Hey, Paul, do you want beer and popcorn delivered to your seat when you get there?" It's like, yes. So to me, it's the convergence of these technologies, because you still have these kind of islands of things that aren't fully standardized, or we all can get in a car, right, and know how to start a car. We all know how to drive it. There's not 6 different kinds of steering wheels. So I think that's what I'm looking forward to is that kind of thing. And then the more personalized service. We've heard about this a lot, and I really don't see it happening that much yet. Maybe, to the top tier season ticket holder, they're getting this kind of personal service. But I think everybody should have this kind of personal service. Like, "Hey, Alan, this is the first time, you've been to Allegiant Stadium. Would you like to try playing the slots over at Circus Circus?" We can send a car for you over there. So, I just think it's happening in other places in the real world. Stadiums always sort of trailed the real world, technology-wise. I mean, we've all been ordering food at fast food places and, off screens for a long time, and it's now just coming to stadiums. So I see that kind of convergence of technologies to really, really speed things up and make going to the stadium, even more fun and less painful than it has to be.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. It's been great having you.
That was fun. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.